When Grace Thompson, a quiet domestic worker, walked into Anthony Romano's mansion for what she thought was just another job, she believed her only task would be to clean rooms and stay invisible. She had no idea that this ordinary workday would place her face to face with danger, fear, and a choice that would change 3 lives forever. What Grace saw inside that house was not normal. Armed security, strange men coming and going, and a heavy silence filled every room. But the most shocking sight was not the power or the money. It was Isabella, Anthony's young daughter, sitting silently in a wheelchair, watching everything without saying a word. Her eyes showed fear, not curiosity, fear that no child should ever carry. Anthony Romano was not just a rich man. Behind his calm manners and controlled voice was a life connected to the mafia, a world where threats did not need to be spoken out loud. Grace quickly realized that this little girl was growing up surrounded by danger, even inside her own home. And when that danger finally crossed a line, Grace would be forced to act. How did a simple employee become the only shield between a terrified child and violent men? What made Grace risk her own life for a girl she barely knew? And how did that single act of courage force a powerful man to question everything he believed about control, money, and protection? Before we dive into this shocking story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories that reveal hidden truths and life-changing choices, don't forget to subscribe. Grace Thompson had worked as a domestic worker for many years, moving from one house to another, always doing what was needed and rarely being noticed. She knew how to clean, cook simple meals, and keep a house running without causing problems. At that moment in her life, she did not have the luxury of waiting for the perfect job. Her rent was due, bills were piling up, and her younger sister depended on her help to get through school. Grace had learned to put her own wishes aside a long time ago. When she saw the job offer connected to Anthony Romano's house, she did not ask many questions. The pay was better than usual, and that was enough. She told herself it would just be another house, another routine, another place where she would keep her head down and do her work. Grace did not imagine comfort or kindness. She only hoped the job would be stable. Stability mattered more than happiness. As she prepared herself on the first day, she reminded herself to stay quiet, be respectful, and not draw attention. That was how she survived. She did not expect this job to change anything. She only needed it to last long enough for her to breathe again. When Grace arrived at the mansion, she immediately noticed that something felt different. The property was large and well protected, with security measures she had never seen in other houses. Gates, cameras, and guards were present, and they watched closely as she entered. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The house was clean and expensive, but it did not feel welcoming. Men she did not recognize moved in and out, some stopping briefly, others staying longer, always serious and quiet. No one smiled. No one spoke more than necessary. Grace felt that she was being observed, even when no one was directly looking at her. She understood very quickly that this was not a normal household. It was a place where people were careful with their words and actions. Grace focused on her steps and her breathing, reminding herself why she was there. This job was not about comfort or curiosity. It was about work. She avoided eye contact and followed instructions exactly as given. The strange movements and the constant presence of unfamiliar men made her uneasy, but she kept those feelings to herself. She had learned that asking questions in places like this could cost her a job. Grace met Anthony Romano shortly after arriving. He was polite when they were introduced, but his attention was divided. His phone rang often, and when it did, he stepped away without explanation. Anthony spoke in a calm and controlled manner, but there was distance in his tone. He did not ask Grace personal questions, nor did he explain much about the house. He simply told her what her responsibilities would be and expected her to follow them. Grace noticed that he seemed tired, even when he stood straight and spoke clearly. His eyes often moved toward doors or windows, as if he was always aware of what was happening around him. There was no warmth in their conversation, but there was also no rudeness. Anthony treated Grace with basic respect, nothing more and nothing less. Grace did not take this personally. She had worked for people like him before, people who believed that keeping distance was the best way to stay in control. She listened carefully, nodded when needed, and made sure not to interrupt. From that moment, she understood that Anthony valued efficiency and silence above all else. As Grace began her tasks, she became more aware of the environment she was now part of. The house ran on strict routines, and every movement seemed planned. Grace cleaned rooms that looked untouched, as if no one truly lived in them. She noticed that conversations stopped when she entered a room and resumed only after she left. The men who came and went never acknowledged her presence, as if she were invisible. This made Grace uncomfortable, but it also made her position clear. She was there to work, not to exist beyond that role. She reminded herself that this was not her home and that she did not belong to the world she was witnessing. Grace focused on the familiar rhythm of her work. Cleaning, organizing, following schedules. These actions grounded her and helped her ignore the tension around her. She told herself that many wealthy families lived like this, guarded and distant. It was not her place to judge or understand. The less she noticed, the safer she would be. Throughout the day, Grace carefully observed how everyone behaved, not out of curiosity, but out of caution. She could sense that mistakes would not be tolerated here. She double-checked her work, made sure she followed instructions exactly, and avoided unnecessary movement. The house felt quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that came from people holding back words. Grace felt the weight of that silence pressing on her, but she did not let it show. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant blending into the background completely. Grace reminded herself again why she had accepted the job. She needed the money. She needed security. Whatever this house was hiding was not her concern. She promised herself she would not get involved, not emotionally and not mentally. As long as she did her job well, she believed she would be left alone. By the end of her first day, Grace was tired, but she felt certain about one thing. This job would require discipline and restraint. She understood clearly that Anthony Romano did not want questions, opinions, or emotional connections from his staff. He wanted work done and silence maintained. Grace accepted that without complaint. She did not come looking for answers or belonging. She came to earn a living. As she prepared to leave, she took one last look at the large, quiet house and felt a mix of unease and determination. She told herself that she had handled worse situations before. If she stayed focused and careful, she could manage this too. Grace left the mansion knowing that her role was simple. Work hard, say little, ask nothing. That was the rule she would follow if she wanted this job to last. Grace met Isabella for the first time during her second day in the house. The girl was sitting quietly in her wheelchair near a window, looking forward but not really looking at anything specific. She did not greet Grace or react to her presence. Isabella was small for her age and very still, with her hands resting on her lap. Grace noticed right away how silent the child was. She did not complain, did not ask for help, and did not show any sign of impatience. Grace had worked with children before, and this silence felt different. It was not calm or peaceful. It felt learned. Grace introduced herself in a soft voice, but Isabella only looked at her briefly and then looked away again. There was no smile, no curiosity. Grace understood that the wheelchair was part of Isabella's life, but she also sensed that it was not the main reason for the sadness she saw. The girl seemed used to being alone, even when people were around her. Grace felt something tighten inside her chest, but she did not show it. She knew that children like Isabella needed time, not pressure. As the hours passed, Grace observed Isabella more closely while doing her work. The girl stayed quiet the entire time, even when others passed by. She did not call for her father or react when his name was mentioned. Grace realized that Isabella did not expect attention from anyone. She seemed to believe that asking for something was useless. This worried Grace more than the wheelchair itself. Grace noticed how carefully Isabella controlled her emotions, as if she had learned that being invisible was safer. When Grace gently asked if Isabella needed anything, the girl shook her head without speaking. Grace did not insist. She remembered how loneliness could teach a person to stay silent. She saw fear in Isabella's eyes, not fear of pain, but fear of being noticed at the wrong time. Grace understood then that the child lived in a world where silence was protection. This made Grace slow down her movements and lower her voice even more. She wanted Isabella to feel no pressure at all. Anthony rarely appeared during the day, and when he did, his time with Isabella was brief. He checked on her quickly, asked if she was fine, and then returned to his work. Grace noticed that he believed providing a large house, security and comfort was enough. He did not seem to realize that Isabella needed something else. Grace did not judge him, but she saw the distance clearly. Isabella did not reach out to her father or change her expression when he left. This told Grace everything she needed to know. The girl was used to emotional absence. Grace continued her tasks, but her attention stayed with Isabella. She saw how the child followed movements with her eyes, always alert, always quiet. Grace knew that fear and loneliness could exist even in the safest-looking places. She decided that, within her role, she could at least offer patience. She could not change the house or the father, but she could change how she treated the child. Grace began to care for Isabella slowly and carefully. She did not speak too much or ask difficult questions. She knelt down so she could be at Isabella's eye level when she spoke. She avoided showing pity or sadness, because she knew children could feel that immediately. Instead, Grace spoke calmly and normally, as if Isabella were any other child. She explained what she was doing before touching the wheelchair or helping with small tasks. This made Isabella less tense. Grace waited for responses without rushing. Sometimes Isabella did not answer at all, and Grace accepted that without disappointment. She understood that trust was not built in one day. Every small action mattered. Grace made sure Isabella always knew what would happen next. This gave the girl a sense of control she clearly lacked. Slowly, Isabella began to look at Grace more often. It was not much, but it was a start. Over time, Grace noticed that Isabella reacted differently to her than to others. The girl watched Grace closely, as if trying to understand her intentions. Grace remained consistent. She spoke in the same calm tone every time and never raised her voice. She respected Isabella's space and never forced interaction. This patience made a difference. Isabella stopped shrinking into herself when Grace entered the room. She did not smile yet, but her body relaxed slightly. Grace felt that Isabella was beginning to feel safer, even if she did not know how to express it. Grace did not try to make the girl talk or laugh. She believed that feeling safe came first. Everything else could wait. She reminded herself that Isabella's silence was a result of fear and loneliness, not stubbornness. By the end of the day, Grace felt emotionally tired, but she also felt certain about one thing. Isabella did not need sympathy or explanations. She needed steady care and respect. Grace understood that her role went beyond basic duties now. Without changing any rules or crossing boundaries, she chose to be present for the child. She did not expect gratitude or affection. She only wanted Isabella to feel less alone. Grace left Isabella that evening with a quiet goodbye, and for the first time, the girl looked directly at her for a few seconds longer than before. That small moment confirmed Grace's instincts. Isabella's sadness was not caused only by the wheelchair. It was caused by fear, silence, and emotional distance. Grace knew that patience would be the key. She was ready to give that patience, one moment at a time. Over the next few days, Grace slowly became part of Isabella's daily routine. She helped her with small tasks, always explaining what she was doing before touching the wheelchair or moving anything. She pushed the chair carefully through the house, never rushing, never acting impatient. Grace paid attention to Isabella's reactions, stopping when the girl seemed tense and continuing only when she felt calm again. These moments were simple, but they mattered. Isabella began to expect Grace's presence and waited for her quietly. Grace did not treat these routines as chores. She treated them as shared time. She spoke in a normal tone, not too soft and not too serious, as if Isabella were any other child. This made Isabella feel less different. Grace noticed that the girl started to relax more during the day. Her shoulders were less stiff, and she watched Grace with growing trust. There were still long silences, but they no longer felt empty. They felt safe. Grace understood that routine was giving Isabella something important: predictability. In a house full of tension and uncertainty, knowing what would happen next made Isabella feel calmer. As the days passed, Grace added small conversations to their routine. She talked while helping Isabella get ready, while pushing the wheelchair, and while sitting nearby. She did not ask difficult questions or push for answers. She spoke about simple things and waited. Sometimes Isabella stayed silent. Other times she answered with short sentences. Grace accepted both. She never reacted with surprise or pressure. This consistency helped Isabella feel comfortable. Slowly, Isabella began to speak more freely. One day, she mentioned feeling scared when certain men came into the house. Her voice was low, and she avoided eye contact. Grace listened closely and did not interrupt. She did not act shocked or angry. She simply acknowledged Isabella's feelings. This made Isabella continue. Grace realized that the girl had been holding these fears inside for a long time. No one had asked. No one had stayed long enough to listen. Grace stayed. That made all the difference. Isabella began to understand that her words were safe with Grace. At night, Grace spent a few quiet moments talking to Isabella before she went to sleep. These conversations were calm and unhurried. Isabella spoke more during these times, when the house was quieter and less tense. She shared that she felt afraid of being noticed by the wrong people. She said she tried to stay quiet so no one would get upset. Grace listened carefully, showing no judgment. She told Isabella that it was okay to feel scared and that she did not have to hide her feelings around her. Grace did not promise protection or solutions. She only promised to listen. This honesty made Isabella feel respected. The girl also spoke about her father. She said she believed she caused him trouble. She thought he was always busy because of her. Grace gently corrected this idea, explaining that adults sometimes carry their own worries. She made sure Isabella did not feel blamed or dismissed. Isabella listened closely. It was clear that these words were new to her. Grace noticed that Isabella's fear was tied closely to loneliness. The girl felt alone, even in a large house. She believed she had to be quiet and small to avoid causing problems. Grace understood this feeling well. Instead of telling Isabella she was wrong, Grace showed her something different through actions. She paid attention, responded calmly, and stayed present. Over time, Isabella's posture changed. She sat more openly and looked up more often. Grace saw small signs of trust growing. Isabella started to ask simple questions and express small preferences. These were things she had never done before. Grace responded positively but calmly, making sure not to overwhelm her. She wanted Isabella to feel in control. The girl was beginning to understand that she was allowed to take up space, at least with Grace. This realization was slow, but it was powerful. As Isabella opened up more, Grace made sure to listen without distraction. She did not multitask or rush their conversations. When Isabella spoke, Grace focused only on her. This made Isabella feel important. She talked about feeling like a burden to her father. She believed that her wheelchair made his life harder. Grace listened carefully and showed understanding. She did not argue or dismiss Isabella's feelings. Instead, she validated them and helped the girl see that her worth did not depend on being easy or quiet. Grace spoke in clear, simple words. She explained that being a child meant needing care and that this was not something to feel ashamed of. Isabella absorbed these words slowly. Grace could tell that no one had ever explained this to her before. These conversations did not change everything at once, but they planted something new inside Isabella. By the end of that week, Isabella no longer felt invisible when Grace was around. She felt noticed, heard, and respected. Grace had not changed the house, the people, or the rules. She had only changed how she treated the child. That was enough to make a difference. Isabella no longer saw herself only as a problem. She began to feel like a child who deserved attention and care. Grace noticed that Isabella's fear had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled her completely. The girl trusted Grace. That trust was built through patience, routine, and listening. And Grace understood that this was just the beginning. She did not expect quick results or dramatic changes. What mattered was that Isabella now knew someone was finally paying attention. Anthony began to notice small changes in Isabella after some time passed. They were not dramatic, but they were clear to him. She slept through the night more often and no longer seemed restless when she woke up. During the day, she spoke a little more, sometimes answering questions instead of staying silent. Once in a while, Anthony even saw her smile, something that had been rare before. These moments caught his attention because they did not match the way things had been for a long time. Anthony had always believed that providing comfort, protection, and a controlled environment was enough for his daughter. Seeing these changes made him question that belief. He started to wonder what had caused this difference. Isabella had not received new treatments or new possessions. The house was the same. The only thing that had changed was Grace. Anthony did not fully understand it yet, but he knew something important was happening. For the first time in a long while, he felt unsure about his role as a father. He watched his daughter more closely, noticing how she reacted when Grace was near. Isabella looked calmer and more open. This made Anthony realize that something emotional was shifting, even if he could not yet explain it. Anthony decided to speak with Grace to understand what was going on. He did not approach her with suspicion, but with quiet curiosity. Their conversation was simple and direct. He asked her if she had noticed any changes in Isabella and what she had been doing differently. Grace answered honestly, explaining that she had only been spending time with Isabella, listening to her, and keeping a steady routine. She did not exaggerate or take credit. She spoke calmly as she always did. Anthony listened carefully. He realized that Grace was not trying to impress him or gain favor. She was simply describing what she did naturally. This made Anthony feel both grateful and uncomfortable. He had always believed that his role was to keep his daughter safe by controlling the environment around her. Hearing Grace speak made him see that safety alone was not enough. Isabella needed something deeper. Anthony felt a quiet tension inside himself as he processed this. He did not interrupt Grace or challenge her words. Instead, he continued listening, trying to understand what he had missed. As the conversation continued, Anthony slowly opened up about his own life. He explained that his world had always been dangerous because of business connections tied to the mafia. He did not go into details, but he made it clear that risk had always been present. Because of that, he believed distance was a form of protection. He thought that keeping emotions controlled and limited would keep Isabella safer. Anthony admitted that he stayed busy and emotionally distant on purpose. He believed this was the responsible choice. Saying these things out loud was not easy for him. He was not used to explaining himself, especially to someone who worked in his house. Grace listened without reacting strongly. She did not show shock or judgment. She simply allowed him to speak. Anthony noticed this and felt a small sense of relief. He realized he had been carrying these thoughts alone for a long time. Speaking them aloud made him see them more clearly. Grace responded carefully and respectfully. She did not criticize Anthony or accuse him of being a bad father. Instead, she acknowledged that he was trying to protect his daughter in the only way he knew how. Then she spoke about Isabella. Grace explained that while security and comfort were important, they were not enough for a child. She said Isabella needed presence, attention, and emotional connection. Grace made it clear that the girl did not feel like a priority, even though everything around her suggested she was protected. Grace spoke in simple words, without raising her voice or pushing too hard. She did not demand change. She only stated what she had observed. Anthony listened quietly. Her words stayed with him because they were calm and honest. Grace did not position herself as an expert or savior. She spoke as someone who cared deeply about the child. This made Anthony take her seriously. Anthony felt something shift inside him during that conversation. For the first time, he understood that his absence was affecting Isabella more than the danger he feared. He realized that his attempts to protect her had also isolated her. This realization was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. He did not argue with Grace or defend his choices. Instead, he accepted that he had been wrong in some ways. Anthony felt respect growing toward Grace, not because she challenged him, but because she spoke with clarity and care. He saw that she was not trying to take his place as a parent. She was trying to support Isabella in a way he had not been able to. This understanding softened his attitude. He no longer saw Grace as just an employee. He began to see her as someone trustworthy and sincere. From that point on, the relationship between Anthony and Grace changed slightly. There was still distance, but it was different now. It was no longer built only on roles and authority. It was built on shared concern for Isabella. Anthony paid more attention to how Grace interacted with his daughter and respected her approach. Grace continued doing her work as before, without crossing boundaries or seeking recognition. The respect between them grew quietly. There were no dramatic moments or promises made, just a mutual understanding. Anthony realized that protecting his daughter meant more than keeping danger away. It meant being present in her life. Grace had helped him see that without forcing or judging him. That realization marked the beginning of a deeper respect between them, one based on honesty, care, and the shared goal of helping Isabella feel truly safe. Grace became part of Isabella's life in a way that no one else in the house had been before. The girl started to look for her naturally, waiting for her in the morning and relaxing when she heard her voice. Grace helped Isabella with daily tasks, stayed near her during quiet moments, and kept the same calm behavior every day. This consistency made Isabella feel safe. The child no longer stayed silent all the time. She spoke more, asked small questions, and showed clear attachment to Grace. When Grace was not nearby, Isabella became uneasy. This bond was not loud or dramatic, but it was deep. Grace understood this attachment and treated it with care. She did not encourage dependence, but she also did not pull away. She remained present and stable. Isabella felt that Grace was someone who stayed, someone who listened, someone who did not disappear. For a child who had lived with fear and emotional distance, this connection meant everything. Grace did not see herself as special. She simply did what felt right. But the effect on Isabella was clear and undeniable. The child was no longer alone in her own house. Anthony noticed the change more clearly as time passed. He saw how Isabella reacted to Grace and how calm she became around her. This was different from anything he had been able to give his daughter. Anthony realized that Grace was no longer just someone who worked in the house. She was someone Isabella trusted deeply. This realization made him pause. Trust was not something Anthony gave easily, especially in his world. Yet he found himself trusting Grace with his daughter without hesitation. He noticed that Grace treated Isabella with respect and patience, never crossing boundaries or seeking control. She did not try to replace him. She simply cared. This made Anthony feel both grateful and uneasy. He was grateful because his daughter was happier. He was uneasy because he understood how important Grace had become. Anthony began to rely on Grace in ways he had not expected. He trusted her judgment when it came to Isabella. This shift happened quietly, without formal decisions. It was built through observation and consistency. As their interactions increased, Conversations between Anthony and Grace became more personal. They were still discreet and careful, never crossing clear lines. Anthony asked Grace about her thoughts, not just about the house, but about Isabella's needs. Grace answered honestly, without trying to impress or demand anything. She spoke simply, focusing on the child. These conversations were calm and respectful. Over time, Anthony shared more about himself as well. He did not speak openly about his crimes, but it was clear that his life was tied to dangerous choices. Grace listened without judgment, just as she had before. These talks created a quiet understanding between them. They were not emotional or dramatic, but they were real. Both felt seen in ways they were not used to. The connection grew naturally, without intention. Neither of them planned it. It happened because they shared concern, silence, and responsibility. A subtle feeling began to form between Grace and Anthony. It was not spoken, but it was felt. They noticed it in the pauses during conversations and in the way they looked at each other when Isabella was present. This feeling was not excitement. It was something deeper and more cautious. Both understood that this connection could not be simple. Grace knew that Anthony lived in a world filled with danger. Anthony knew that Grace came from a different life, one built on honesty and survival, not power. This difference created distance, even as the feeling grew. Neither of them acted on it. They both knew that getting closer could bring consequences. Anthony was aware that his life could put Grace at risk. Grace was aware that his world could destroy the stability she had worked so hard to build. The growing bond began to scare them both in different ways. Grace feared losing the job and the trust she had earned. She also feared being pulled into a life she did not belong to. Anthony feared depending too much on someone he could not protect from his world. Despite these fears, neither chose to step back completely. They continued as before, careful and controlled. The bond remained quiet but strong. Grace stayed focused on Isabella, and Anthony respected that focus. This balance kept things from crossing into something they were not ready to face. Still, the presence of that feeling changed how they saw each other. It added weight to every interaction. By this point, it was clear that the relationship between Grace, Isabella, and Anthony was no longer just professional. Isabella felt supported and loved. Anthony felt trust and respect. Grace felt responsibility and care. The bond between them was fragile but real. It brought comfort, but it also carried risk. None of them spoke openly about it, but all of them felt it. Grace understood that this connection could not grow freely without consequences. Anthony understood that ignoring it completely would hurt his daughter. This tension stayed beneath the surface, shaping their actions and choices. What had started as a job had become something far more complicated, and all of them sensed that this bond, once formed, could not simply be undone. Luca Ferraro arrived at the house without warning, and his presence was felt immediately. He did not raise his voice or make a scene, but everything about him carried pressure. Grace noticed the change in the atmosphere as soon as he entered. Conversations stopped, movement slowed, and the house seemed to hold its breath. Luca asked to speak with Anthony, and Anthony agreed without hesitation. Their conversation took place in a quiet room, away from others, but the tension was clear even from a distance. Luca spoke calmly, choosing his words carefully. He reminded Anthony of recent decisions made in the business and made it clear that those choices had consequences. There were no threats spoken directly, but every sentence carried weight. Anthony responded in the same controlled manner, confident and firm, as if this was a situation he had handled many times before. Grace could tell that this was not a normal visitor. This was someone who did not need to explain his authority. His presence alone was enough to create fear. Grace stayed where she was supposed to be, silent and observant, understanding that this was not her place to interfere. While the conversation continued, Isabella was nearby and could hear parts of what was being said. She did not understand the details, but she recognized the tone, the cold voices, the serious expressions, and the heavy silence reminded her of moments she had tried to forget. Her body tensed immediately, her breathing changed, and her hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair. Grace noticed this right away. Isabella's eyes were wide, and she looked scared. This was not confusion. This was memory. Isabella had lived moments like this before, moments where adults spoke quietly, but danger filled the room. Grace moved closer to the girl, lowering herself to her level without drawing attention. Isabella did not speak, but her fear was clear. Grace understood that this fear was not new. It had been built over time, connected to the world her father lived in. Grace felt anger, not toward Anthony directly, but toward the situation that forced a child to live with this constant fear. She stayed calm for Isabella, even as her own concern grew. Luca continued speaking to Anthony in a steady, controlled way. There was no shouting, no physical threat, but the message was clear. He expected compliance. Anthony listened and responded confidently, showing no sign of fear. He spoke as someone who believed he still had control. His posture was calm, his voice even. Anthony believed he could manage this situation like he always had. He believed that keeping his emotions out of it was the right approach. Grace could see that Anthony was trying to maintain authority, trying to show that he was not intimidated. From his perspective, this was business. Difficult but manageable. Grace saw something else. She saw the cost of that confidence reflected in Isabella's fear. The child did not need to hear threats to feel danger. The tone alone was enough to bring back old pain. As the conversation ended, Luca left without saying much more. He did not need to. His message had been delivered. The house did not immediately return to normal. The tension remained, lingering in the air. Anthony acted as if everything was under control. He did not check on Isabella right away. He believed that keeping calm would keep the situation contained. Grace stayed with Isabella, who was clearly shaken. The girl's fear did not disappear just because the visitor was gone. Grace spoke to her softly, reminding her that she was safe in that moment. Isabella listened, but her body remained tense. Grace realized how deeply this fear was rooted. It was not about one man. It was about a life lived under constant pressure. Grace understood now more clearly than ever that Isabella's sadness and fear were directly tied to her father's world. Anthony returned to his routine quickly, convinced that he had handled the situation. He believed that control and experience were enough to keep danger away. Grace did not challenge him. She knew this was not the moment. Instead, she focused on Isabella. She stayed close, offering quiet reassurance. Isabella slowly calmed down, but the fear did not fully leave her eyes. Grace saw how easily the child's sense of safety could be broken. It took very little to bring the fear back. Grace understood that Isabella lived with this every day, even when things seemed calm. This realization weighed heavily on her. She knew that the girl's silence, her sadness, and her attachment all made sense now. Isabella was not just quiet by nature. She was protecting herself. That evening, Grace reflected on what she had seen. Luca's visit had confirmed what she already suspected. The danger was not occasional. It was part of the house, part of the life Anthony lived. Anthony believed he could manage it, but Isabella paid the emotional price. Grace felt a stronger sense of responsibility than before. She understood that Isabella's fear would not disappear as long as this world remained around her. Grace did not see Anthony as careless, but she saw how wrong he was about emotional protection. Security and control were not enough. The fear had already reached the child. Grace stayed close to Isabella, offering the only thing she could: presence. She knew now that Isabella lived under constant fear because of her father's choices, and that reality could not be ignored anymore. Anthony was not at the house that day, and Grace was alone with Isabella when the situation changed. The house had been quiet, almost too quiet, and Grace sensed tension before she understood why. The men who arrived were familiar faces, connected to the same world Grace had already seen before. They did not come to talk calmly this time. Their presence felt heavier, more urgent. Grace understood that they were there to pressure Anthony, even though he was not present. Isabella noticed the change immediately. Her body stiffened, and her eyes filled with fear. She recognized the danger even without hearing words. Grace stayed close to the girl, trying to keep her calm. She spoke in a steady voice, telling Isabella to stay with her. Grace knew this was not a normal visit. The air felt tight, and every movement mattered. She kept her focus on Isabella, aware that the child was already overwhelmed. Grace tried to guide her away from the situation, hoping to move her to a safer place before things became worse. As the men moved through the house, the pressure increased. Voices were firmer, movements faster. Isabella tried to move away in her wheelchair, reacting on pure instinct. She wanted distance from the men and the fear they brought with them. Grace helped her turn the chair, but the floor was uneven, and the wheelchair suddenly stopped. It would not move forward or backward. Isabella panicked. Her breathing became fast, and she started crying out of fear. One of the men noticed this and stepped closer. His posture was aggressive, his movements sharp. He did not need to touch Isabella to scare her. His approach alone was enough. Grace felt her heart race. She understood that the situation was no longer under control. Isabella was trapped, unable to escape, and completely exposed. Grace did not have time to think about consequences. She only saw the fear in the child's face. Grace reacted without planning. She moved directly in front of Isabella, placing herself between the man and the wheelchair. She raised her arms and used her body to block him. Grace did not speak loudly or threaten him. She simply refused to move. The man pushed her hard to get her out of the way. Grace fell to the ground, hitting her body against the floor. Pain spread quickly, but she did not scream. Her only concern was Isabella. Even on the ground, Grace positioned herself so that she still blocked the man's path. The push had been violent, and Grace was clearly hurt. The men froze for a moment, surprised by her reaction. This was not resistance they expected. Grace had not tried to fight them. She had only protected the child. That moment of hesitation changed everything. The men stepped back, realizing the situation had crossed a line. There was no benefit in continuing. Grace was injured, and Isabella was crying uncontrollably. The pressure they wanted to apply had turned into something dangerous. One by one, they retreated, leaving the house without saying much. The silence that followed was heavy. Grace remained on the floor for a few seconds, catching her breath and checking her body. Pain was present, but she forced herself to focus on Isabella. The child was shaking, her hands tight on the arms of the wheelchair. Grace slowly sat up and spoke softly to her. She told Isabella that it was over, that the men were gone. Isabella looked at Grace with fear and relief mixed together. She reached out for her, still crying. Grace moved closer to Isabella despite the pain. She stayed low, keeping her voice calm and steady. She reassured Isabella again and again, even though her own body hurt. The house was quiet now, but the fear remained. Grace understood that Isabella had just lived through one of her worst fears. The wheelchair was still stuck, but it no longer mattered. Grace stayed where she was, making sure Isabella was not alone. She did not try to stand immediately. She wanted Isabella to see that she was still there. That presence mattered more than anything else. Isabella slowly calmed down, her crying turning into quiet sobs. Grace did not rush her. She stayed until the child's breathing slowed. By the time the situation fully settled, Grace was exhausted and in pain, but Isabella was safe. That was the only thing that mattered to Grace. She had not planned to be brave. She had not thought about danger or consequences. She had simply reacted to protect a child who could not protect herself. Isabella was alive and unharmed because Grace did not move away. She stayed in front of her when it mattered most. The fear, the pain, and the chaos passed, but that moment could not be undone. Grace had placed herself in harm's way without hesitation. Isabella was saved because Grace chose to stay. Anthony arrived at the house and immediately saw that something was wrong. The silence was different, heavier than usual. When he found Grace, she was clearly injured, sitting close to Isabella. Her movements were slow and her face showed pain she was trying to hide. Isabella was still in shock. Her body was stiff, her eyes unfocused, and she was holding tightly to the arms of her wheelchair. The scene stopped Anthony in place. For a moment he could not move or speak. He had left the house believing everything was under control, as he always did. Now he was faced with the result of that belief. Grace looked up at him, but did not complain or ask for help. Her attention stayed on Isabella. Anthony understood immediately that something serious had happened in his absence. He felt a deep sense of fear, mixed with guilt. Seeing his daughter like that made it clear that the danger he thought he controlled had reached her again. This time, it had happened inside his own house, when he was not there to stop it. Anthony focused on Isabella, trying to calm her, but he could see that she was deeply shaken. She did not respond to him right away. Her fear had not faded just because he was present. That realization hurt him more than anything else. He had believed that his role was to keep danger outside, but it was clear now that his choices had allowed fear to live inside the house. Anthony looked at Grace again and saw the physical cost she had paid. Her injury was real, and it had happened because she stood in front of his daughter. That thought stayed with him. He understood that Isabella had been unable to defend herself and that Grace had taken that risk without hesitation. Anthony felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on him. This was not just about business anymore. His world had put his child in danger again. The reality he had avoided for so long was now impossible to ignore. Anthony spoke to Grace, his voice quieter than usual. He thanked her and tried to offer compensation, believing that money was the fastest way to respond. He spoke about covering medical costs and offering more pay. To him, this was how problems were handled. Grace listened without interrupting. When he finished, she refused calmly. There was no anger in her voice, no pride. She simply said she did not do what she did for him or for money. She explained clearly that she acted because Isabella could not defend herself. Grace made it clear that the child's safety was the only reason she had stepped forward. Her words were direct and simple. She did not raise her voice or make accusations. That refusal caught Anthony off guard. He was used to money-solving problems, or at least easing them. Grace's response made him realize that what had happened could not be reduced to payment. Grace's refusal forced Anthony to truly face the situation. He understood that what Grace had done was not a service that could be bought. It was an act of instinct and care. She had protected his daughter in a way he had failed to do. That realization was difficult to accept. Anthony felt shame alongside gratitude. He saw that Grace's values were clear and strong. She had acted without thinking of reward or consequence. This made Anthony question his own choices. For years he had believed that control, distance and money were enough to keep his family safe. Now he saw that they were not. Grace had shown him something he had ignored. Protection was not just about power, it was about presence and responsibility. Anthony began to see Grace differently in that moment. She was no longer just an employee who followed instructions. She was someone who acted when it mattered most, without hesitation. Her strength was quiet, but undeniable. Anthony respected her in a way he had not before. He also began to see his own life more clearly. The danger he lived with was no longer an abstract risk. It had a face. It was his daughter's fear. That fear was something he could no longer justify or ignore. Grace's actions had removed the excuses he had used for years. He could no longer pretend that his choices only affected him. By the end of that moment, something had changed inside Anthony. He understood that his world had already taken too much from his daughter. Grace's refusal of money made the truth unavoidable. What mattered was not what he could give, but what he had allowed to happen. Grace stayed by Isabella's side, focused and steady despite her pain. Anthony stood there, fully aware that his life could not continue the same way. He did not say much more. He did not need to. The truth was clear. Grace had protected Isabella when he could not, and that fact would stay with him. From that moment on, Anthony could no longer look at Grace, his daughter, or his own life in the same way. The connection between Grace and Anthony grew stronger after what happened, but it no longer felt safe or simple. Everything between them now carried weight. Grace could feel it in the way Anthony looked at her and in the way he spoke more carefully. The house felt tense again, not from noise, but from what was unsaid. The men connected to the Mafia made it clear, without needing to say much, that silence and obedience were expected. Nothing dramatic happened, but the pressure was constant. Grace understood that this world did not forgive mistakes. She knew that what she had done placed her directly in the middle of something dangerous. Even so, she did not regret protecting Isabella. Fear was present, but regret was not. Grace accepted that fear was now part of her reality. She continued her routine, stayed calm, and focused on Isabella. She did not speak openly about her worries, but they were always there. Every step she took in the house felt heavier. Still, she did not change her behavior. She remained steady and present, even knowing the risk. Grace became more aware of her own safety as the days passed. She noticed how carefully people watched her and how conversations stopped when she entered a room. The fear was quiet, but it was real. Grace thought about leaving more than once, not because she wanted to, but because she understood the danger. She knew she was not part of Anthony's world and never would be. At the same time, she knew that walking away would leave Isabella alone again. This thought stayed with her constantly. Grace felt torn between protecting herself and staying for the child who depended on her. Despite this fear, she never blamed Anthony or Isabella for what she felt. She had made her choice when she stepped in front of that wheelchair. She accepted the consequences of that choice. Grace did not speak about bravery or sacrifice. She simply believed she had done what was necessary. That belief gave her strength, even when fear tried to take over. Isabella sensed the tension immediately. She noticed the way adults spoke less and moved carefully. More than that, she noticed the change in Grace. The girl became afraid that Grace might leave. Isabella asked her repeatedly if she was going away. She held on to Grace more tightly and became anxious when Grace stepped out of the room. Isabella's fear was clear and direct. She begged Grace not to leave her alone. These moments were painful for Grace. She reassured Isabella as best she could, telling her she was still there. Grace did not make promises she could not keep, but she stayed close. She understood that Isabella's fear of abandonment was tied to everything she had already lived through. Grace knew that leaving would cause deep pain. This made the decision even harder. Isabella's need for her was emotional and immediate. Grace felt responsible not just for the child's safety, but for her emotional stability. Anthony watched all of this closely. He saw how deeply Isabella depended on Grace and how real the bond between them was. He also saw the fear that now surrounded them. The pressure from the Mafia was no longer something he could separate from his family life. For the first time, Anthony understood clearly that his choices were putting everything he cared about at risk. He saw Grace living with fear because of him. He saw his daughter afraid of losing the one person who made her feel safe. This realization was painful. Anthony had always believed he could manage his world. Now he saw that control was an illusion. The cost of staying in that life was becoming too high. He understood that if he continued on the same path, he would lose Grace, Isabella, or both. This thought stayed with him constantly. It changed how he saw his own power and his own responsibility. The bond between Grace and Anthony grew stronger through shared fear and honesty. They spoke carefully, but their understanding deepened. They did not act like people chasing happiness. They acted like people carrying responsibility. The romance between them was quiet, but firm. It was built on trust, respect, and shared concern for Isabella. Neither of them ignored the danger. They acknowledged it openly. Grace did not demand change, but Anthony felt the pressure of reality. He knew that loving Grace meant facing the truth about his life. Grace knew that caring for Anthony meant accepting risk. They stayed connected because walking away felt impossible. The feelings between them were no longer just emotional. They were tied to real consequences. By this point, everything was clear. Grace stayed despite fear. Isabella held on to Grace because she felt safe with her. Anthony understood that his world threatened everything he loved. The romance between Grace and Anthony was no longer a question of desire. It was a question of choice. It existed under threat, shaped by danger and responsibility. There was no excitement in it, only truth. They did not speak about the future, but they both understood what was at stake. Love had grown in the most difficult place possible. It was not hidden from fear. It lived alongside it. Anthony reached a point where he could no longer ignore what was in front of him. Everything that had happened made one truth clear to him. If he continued living the same way, he would lose his daughter and the woman who had protected her. For years, he had believed that money, control, and influence were enough to keep his family safe. Now he understood that this belief was wrong. The danger did not stay outside his home. It walked through the door and stood in front of his child. Anthony made a decision that he had avoided for a long time. He chose to break away from the mafia. He knew this choice would come with serious consequences. There would be financial losses and real risks. His life would become uncertain in new ways. Still, he accepted that price. For the first time, Anthony did not choose power. He chose responsibility. He chose to protect his daughter and Grace not with money, but with action. This decision was not made out of anger or pride. It was made out of fear of losing what truly mattered. The decision was not easy, and Anthony understood that nothing would change overnight. Walking away meant giving up security that had once felt solid. It meant facing consequences without the protection he was used to. But Anthony was clear about one thing. No amount of wealth was worth seeing his daughter live in fear. No business deal was worth putting Grace in danger. He accepted that his life would become simpler in some ways and harder in others. This time, he did not try to control everything. He accepted uncertainty because it was the only way forward. Anthony focused on one goal only, keeping Isabella safe and allowing her to live without constant fear. That goal guided every decision he made from that moment on. He did not expect praise or forgiveness. He only wanted a chance to do things differently. Choosing a new path felt heavy, but it also felt honest. Grace stayed by their side through this change. She did not stay because she felt like a hero or a savior. She stayed because she cared. Grace never tried to take credit for Anthony's decision. She did not see herself as the reason everything changed. She simply remained present, steady, and supportive. Grace understood that her role was not to lead or control. It was to be part of their lives in a real and grounded way. She continued caring for Isabella with the same patience and respect as before. She treated Anthony the same way as well. There was no sense of victory in her behavior, only commitment. Grace did not demand security or promises. She chose to stay because she believed in the family they were becoming. Her presence was calm and constant, helping both Anthony and Isabella adjust to a new reality. Grace did not replace anything that was lost. She helped build something new. Isabella changed as the fear slowly left her life. Without the constant tension in the house, she began to relax in ways she never had before. She laughed more freely and spoke without hesitation. Her smiles were no longer rare or forced. They came naturally. Isabella felt safe enough to be a child again. She no longer watched every movement or listened for danger. Grace remained close, and Anthony made an effort to be present in her daily life. Isabella noticed this immediately. She felt valued, not protected from a distance, but cared for up close. The change did not erase her past fears, but it gave her room to heal. Isabella no longer believed she was a burden. She felt like she belonged. That feeling made all the difference. For the first time in a long time, Isabella smiled without fear behind her eyes. The house itself felt different as well. It was still quiet, but the silence no longer carried tension. There were no unspoken threats hanging in the air. Grace moved through the house without feeling watched. Anthony no longer lived on constant alert. Life was not perfect or easy, but it was honest. The family adjusted to losses and changes together. Anthony accepted that he had to rebuild parts of his life from the ground up. Grace accepted that the future would require patience. Isabella accepted that safety did not mean isolation. Each of them carried responsibility in this new chapter. The bond between them was not built on fear anymore. It was built on trust and choice. That made it stronger than anything money could buy. The story did not end with celebration or comfort. It ended with understanding. Anthony realized that the greatest act of courage was not standing up to powerful people or risking his life. It was choosing a different path when it mattered most. Grace did not see herself as a hero. She saw herself as someone who stayed when it was easier to leave. Isabella did not see herself as a victim anymore. She saw herself as a child who was loved. Together, they formed a family that did not exist before. The real change was not in what they gained or lost. It was in the choice Anthony made to protect with presence instead of power. That choice changed everything. If this story moved you, if it made you think about courage, choices, and the quiet strength of ordinary people, then Moolah Tales is the place for you. Here we share stories that reveal what money and power cannot buy, and how a single decision can change a life forever. If you haven't yet, subscribe to Moolah Tales and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Leave a like if this story touched you, and write in the comments what part impacted you the most. Your support helps these stories reach more people and helps us keep telling them.